Welcome. I'm Jan. I'm one of the co-founders of Mendeley. I'm going to talk very specifically about a use case, how we imagine peer review could be implemented on a platform like Mendeley. And what I would love to do is get your feedback on that specific idea, because this is stuff that we are either implementing or not. So it is, it will be used by a couple of million users, or it won't, depending on the feedback from people like you. I think the overarching theme of how we think about this peer review and how we can improve on the existing system, how we do peer review right now, how we can leverage the new technologies that academia, ResearchGate, Mendeley bring to the game. And I think where we are very strong is especially that social glue that ties everything together. Just very quickly, I assume that probably most of you are familiar with what Mendeley does. For those of you who don't, we have a desktop application that runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux mobile apps, and people can drag and drop PDF articles that they have to read and organize and possibly cite for their future work into that application, and sorts and organizes these PDF documents very much like iTunes helps you to organize your MP3 files. With the specific idea of, we extract the metadata from those PDF documents and build a structured database very easily. It also lets researchers organize and annotate papers, so there's a PDF viewer in that application. You can make highlights and annotations and share those annotations and highlights and papers and discussions with your friends. So there's also a collaborative aspect already implemented in that workflow solution. And then most importantly, I think what we then do is we aggregate all that activity that's going on in the Mendeley environment anonymously in the cloud, and that is what I call the social glue of kind of academic research. The funny thing is that this kind of activity is already going on, but it's invisible, and we are trying to really embrace that and make it visible and make it transparent. And why that is important and why we focus so much on this social glue, I'm going to explain with this kind of schematic view of how you might look at what's going on in the industry. So we have a lot of content, valuable content that is being pushed out and put out by content producers, namely the publishers, right? On top of that, you have a layer of metadata, which is automated semantic interlinking and stuff like that. So people who kind of try to enrich the massive body of content and make it more valuable and make it more discoverable. And that is being done by publishers, but there are also several service providers in that market. But and I've shown that also last year, I still feel we are still missing on that social layer on top. And that is where, Mendeley, academia, ResearchGate, where I think we add value really, because nobody else is really thinking about that, or at least not trying to actively build infrastructure, technological infrastructure, to capture this activity that's going on. Which is also interesting because we have the technologies, right? Other industries show us that they can build this technology to embrace that social activity, but in the academic world, I think we're not doing a great job as of now. Now, what happens if in the future that social layer suddenly becomes so much more important? If all the discovery, all the collaboration, all that stuff is being driven by the social layer. So you can see that in other industries, the more, let's say, consumer-focused industries, where you have Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, which are basically huge engines and platforms and infrastructures to drive engagement, to drive discovery, to drive collaboration, all that kind of stuff. So what happens if it goes in that direction, but we are not prepared? We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the concepts, we don't have the business models, we don't have the thinking around that. So that is, I think, how you might look at the world, and where I believe, we as startup companies really try to add value. So how could we then use Mendeley and the social glue that I just explained to improve peer review? In Mendeley's case specifically, we have very rich information about scholars via their libraries, so the libraries that they build up. We know very well, what they read, how they interact with that content. Again, we preserve privacy of the individual by not revealing who's reading what explicitly, but we say, there's a paper that is being read by computer science professors in the US. So we do have very rich information about users' profiles, because it's so embedded in the workflow of the end user. We also are very strong in actually creating interactivity via the groups functionality, for example, via discussions, via allowing people to annotate, via allowing people to highlight, and do that in a group. And it would also be possible to show these discussions in an anonymized fashion on the article page on Mendeley Web, and make some piece of this contribution that's currently going on mostly in a secret fashion public, and to give credit to those scholars who choose to share that. So you might think about, you just reveal for an academic paper which are the most annotated or highly annotated pages within that paper. You don't need to say that person said specifically that, positive or negative about that piece in that paper, but you can show the activity that's going on in that paper. So these are just some ideas, and I'm going to talk to each of these three ideas in more detail. So if we look at the individual libraries of the users, if we are able to build these profiles via technological infrastructure, then we could actually try to create a tool or services on top of that allow for automated and crowdsourced identification and invitation of peer reviews. So somebody submits a paper, Mendeley can analyze that. Mendeley can analyze the content. You have semantic data extraction, entity extraction, but you can also look at the citations that this author chose to make, and based on that, cross-compare this information to Mendeley's user base and to the libraries of these individual users. You can then also enrich that, basically what are the publications that the individual Mendeley user himself has made, what is the readership, so to say, the impact of those publications, what is the network of that user. So you can basically compare the paper that should be peer-reviewed with the individuals and try to match this and try to find who could be a peer reviewer, a person who might be interested in actually peer reviewing that specific paper. And it's an automated process. You can do that automatically via the technology. And what then happens is very simply you send a notification to that individual user, say, hey, there's a new paper, you might be interested, give him some, keywords or stuff like that, and then the person can choose to accept or to decline. But you can also, again, because we have the technological infrastructure, you have people on one platform, you can then also allow that person to maybe reshare that invitation to peer review paper with a colleague, because he thinks actually he's not the right one to do this, but one of his co-authors from a previous paper. So again, you leverage both the kind of automatic intelligence that you can build as well as the crowdsourced piece where you leverage the individual's knowledge. Secondly, again, in Mendeley's case, you can create a collaborative and interactive environment that I think could actually increase transparency and speed of peer reviews. So what you see here is a screenshot of one of Mendeley's groups, which are very much like the Facebook newsfeed. It's not rocket science. It's something that other industries have demonstrated how to do it. They do it well. Why can't we try to look at how we adapt that for our industry? And the way that would work is you create a group. In that group, that one paper is being submitted. The peer reviewers who have been invited and have accepted to peer review that paper are being invited or being kind of put in that group together, and they can then, discuss this paper basically all together. You can also put related literature in that one group, right? You don't have to just put one paper. You can put related literature and then share that and have a much more collaborative and interactive process that drives the peer review. You might even imagine to invite the authors or author of that paper into that group and have that interactive discussion with them together and say, hey, please comment, this is still not clear. And as you know, as I explained earlier, we even have the integrated PDF viewer in Mendeley Desktop, so you can go intra-article. You don't have, let's say, okay, we have a discussion about that article, but we have a discussion within that article. We can have highlights and annotations, and then the peer reviewers might request the author to actually comment, right? And so it becomes a conversation, and science is a conversation. The problem is just that the infrastructure that we are having, or basically that we're missing, doesn't allow for that conversation to happen in a much faster fashion. Obviously, there are a couple of questions that result from that, and admittedly, we don't know the answer, but that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to get your feedback. What about the privacy and anonymity of reviewers, right? Vis-a-vis the author, but also vis-a-vis each other. Like, are people's mindsets ready to actually reveal who they are and how they communicate with each other? Do they want to show that? And here we come back to what Richard mentioned earlier. It's also a problem of incentivization. If you could, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, if you could attribute that contribution to individuals, we could give them credit for that. There are more opportunities for that. The reviewers could ask or even request the authors to upload raw data and analysis results into that Mendeley group. You could look at the raw data, and that would facilitate a lot of stuff. First, when you actually publish the paper, you have the data immediately with it attached to it. You can facilitate stuff like trying to reproduce the research results and so on. So you actually, by leveraging a technology platform, you can do much more than just driving a conversation. But then on the other hand, is what we also know when academics get to speak to each other, how can we avoid endless discussions? How do we put a stop and get to actually decision point? Again, I don't know the solution yet, but should it be a time window? Should we say, okay, now you got 14 days, do it, and whatever the result after that is, there's a cutoff point? Or is it by mutual agreement eventually? Or is it that the journal has a policy? Or we don't know. But this is stuff where we have to create policies, but it's us, right? We can create that. Now, the third piece of that is, how can we provide credits for this peer review activity? How can we help with the incentivization problem? So I think in general, people should be incentivized to review new papers because it's new content that comes to them, right? Because you as a peer reviewer, you get early access to potentially interesting findings. Again, with entity extraction, with all the readership analysis that we have and stuff like that, you can actually say, well, this is really interesting to you. You can leverage recommendation algorithms, so you can avoid actually putting a paper in front of somebody's face to review it who actually says, well, that's actually really not that interesting to me. You can then also demonstrate the contribution of a reviewer via, and we have that here on the right-hand side, demonstrating the peer review activity of that researcher if the researcher chooses to make that public. And funnily enough, we know that with one section of Mendeley users that works pretty well. And it might sound simplistic, but we have about 1,500 Mendeley advisors on the ground around the world who represent Mendeley and what we stand for and what we want to change and what we want to do for free. We don't give them any money, but they, amongst many other things, can put a badge on their profile on Mendeley which says Mendeley Advisor. So obviously we have to think about, we don't want to get very shallow, but what I'm saying is, if we understand that, if we start to think around that, we will find ways to make that work, and we will find ways to find things that are attractive to those people to put on their profile. And then the usage of those peer-reviewed papers could also reflect back on the reviewer. So let's say I've reviewed a paper, and that paper then is, has a very positive reception in the community. I think if somebody then actually made the effort to review that, to actually contributed to putting that paper into the academic community, that should reflect positively also on the reviewers. But currently it's not, because currently we can't trace back who actually was the reviewer. So it's not possible. But overall, I do think still the incentivization problem is still a big issue. So, and that's where the community, which is us, should support that to accelerate that change. And we should think around how can we give more credit and acknowledgement to those scholars who contribute via peer reviews. To finish, I think there are a couple of ideas that you can extend on. You can extend this kind of workflow tool and workflow idea almost indefinitely, I think. You can tie in pre-submission tools, a plagiarism checker, so that the peer reviewers can be sure, actually, I don't need to worry about that. There are service providers in that market. You get a green checkbox, has been checked via plagiarism checker, it's all right, because if you peer review a paper and later on, it's being revealed that it was plagiarized, and that doesn't reflect positively on you as a reviewer. So you can have all sorts of added value services on top of that makes everybody's life easier. Secondly, I think we should also continue to think around, should this be only pre-publication? So should there be a threshold you have to run through that process until you can publish a paper, or should we also run experiments where we do this exclusively post-publication? So we say, okay, you put it out there, and then based on community, peer commentary, readership, we actually say this has been a good or impactful paper or not. I was talking about this peer commentary. We should also try to build a network of peer commentary. So we are not saying it all has to happen on Mendeley. We allow for massive amounts of resharing, taking data from Mendeley, put it somewhere else. I think we need to increase the size of the pie so that everybody's better off. And if we manage to increase the size of the pie, we as Mendeley, our share will increase, so we are better off. There are, again, other services in that ecosystem, like F1000, Rubrik, and we're going to hear about that later. How can we allow those people who think about that to tie in and to leverage existing infrastructures or larger scale infrastructures that for example, Mendeley is trying to build? And lastly, also something very explorative, but I think something that we really need to get our head around, how could we capture and surface many of the papers that never get published? For many reasons. But then again, if you have a technological infrastructure, maybe we find ways to capture that. Thank you.